It was nearly midnight when the lights of Silverline Technologies painted the upper floors of the tower in cold white glow. The city below was dark and quiet, but the boardroom on the 48th floor pulsed with tension. Natalie Pierce sat at the head of a long glass table, her posture sharp, her eyes fixed on the contract glowing on her laptop screen. The deal with Apex Systems was worth more than $1 billion, a number that could steady the company's fragile stock price, and silence. The board that questioned her every decision. The digital clock on the wall read 11:58 p.m., and the air smelled faintly of coffee and ozone from the screens. She was only 34, but exhaustion had already etched itself into the way she moved. For 3 days she had barely slept, kept alive by caffeine and ambition. Gordon Hale, the CFO, leaned over her shoulder whispering that once she signed, everything would fall into place. Natalie nodded, not really listening. All she could think about was the pressure, the voices in her head repeating that failure was not an option. Outside the glass wall, a janitor pushed a cleaning cart slowly down the polished corridor. His name tag read Eli Turner. Most people in the building didn't notice him, but he had been working this shift for 3 years. A quiet man with steady hands. He moved with the rhythm of someone used to being invisible. He stopped near the door to the boardroom, adjusting his mop bucket, careful not to make noise. The faint hum of air vents mixed with the muffled argument inside. Natalie reached for her glass of water, her hand trembling slightly from fatigue. At that same moment, Eli's cartwheel caught the edge of a rug and jerked. The metal bucket tilted, water sloshing out in a glittering arc through the door left slightly open for ventilation. It hit the edge of the table, knocking over her glass. And before anyone could react, a wave of water cascaded across her laptop. Sparks hissed. The screen went black. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then chaos. Gordon shouted to unplug everything. Another executive swore. Natalie stood frozen, her heart pounding in her ears. Then the screen flickered back on. Lines of text appeared. Not the contract, but strange code and file names scrolling fast. A progress bar crawled across the center of the display, showing confidential data uploading to an external address. The room fell silent except for the soft dripping of water from the table's edge. Natalie's breath caught. Someone muttered that the system must have been hacked. Gordon turned on Eli, his voice rising, accusing him of sabotage. Natalie's anger snapped to the surface. She stepped toward the janitor, her voice cold, demanding to know what he had done. Eli didn't flinch. His eyes met hers, calm and clear in the harsh fluorescent light. "Now you see why I had to do that," he said quietly. For a moment, no one understood. The words hung in the air, steady and deliberate. Natalie felt something shift inside her, something she couldn't name yet. Around them, the laptop continued to hum, the upload frozen at 99%. Midnight ticked past, the deal unsigned, and the night that would change both of their lives had only just begun. Eli Turner's world began long before the marble floors and glass walls of Silverline Technologies. His days started quietly in a small apartment on the east side of the city, where the walls carried the soft hum of traffic and the scent of old paint. By 6:30 a.m., he was usually home, slipping off his uniform before waking his daughter, Maya, for school. She was 8, curious, and endlessly talkative. He made her pancakes in the shape of letters, though most mornings they came out uneven. She laughed anyway. Their mornings were simple, warm, and unremarkable to anyone else. But for Eli, they were proof that he still had something worth protecting. There had been a time when his life looked different. Years ago, he had been a network security engineer for a defense contractor, the kind of man who spent more time thinking about encryption than sleep. He was good at it, respected, trusted. Then a breach occurred, one that leaked prototypes and trade data. The investigation pointed to his credentials. The real culprit, a colleague with connections higher up, walked free. Clearing his name would have meant dragging the company through scandal and forcing Maya, who had just lost her mother, into a public mess. He walked away instead. No lawsuit, no defense. Just silence. The story ended quietly, filed away under resignation, while he took a job cleaning the buildings that used to hire him. Now, during long nights in empty offices, he practiced what he called clean work. The phrase meant more than keeping floors spotless. It meant doing things right, even when no one was watching. He cleaned each desk as if it mattered, fixed loose wires, checked locks. He noticed the small things most people ignored: flickering router lights that blinked out of rhythm, unlogged cables leading into walls, access panels that should have been sealed. Patterns spoke to him like language. He never said anything. Though, janitors didn't give tech advice. After his shift, he sometimes helped Maya with her homework. Lately, she had been obsessed with water science. One night, she showed him a crayon drawing of a droplet that split into colored streams carrying tiny dots of data. She said it was her idea for how information could flow through water. He pinned it to the refrigerator. Later, as he wiped the kitchen counter, he caught himself smiling. Clean work, he thought. She already understood. Across town, Natalie Pierce stared at her reflection in the glass of her corner office. It was 2:45 a.m., and the city lights below looked like fractured constellations. Her mother's silver ring caught the glow as she rubbed her thumb across the engraved words, "Trust the right people." She hadn't done that in years. The board's pressure had become unbearable. Gordon Hale's voice still echoed in her head, telling her that delays would destroy the company. Every move she made felt like a test. She had become meticulous, checking every detail twice, terrified of slipping. Yet the more control she demanded, the lonelier she became. The world saw her as decisive, unbreakable. In truth, she hadn't felt sure of anything in a long time, while she buried herself in reports and investor emails. Eli pushed his cart through the quiet halls several floors below. The night had been routine until he noticed something strange. The access log on the maintenance console blinked with a timestamp that didn't belong. A cable ran along the ceiling, newly installed, yet not listed in any work order. He followed it with his eyes to a router that pulsed in a rhythm too fast for normal traffic. He made a note of it, just in his mind, and moved on. Some part of him knew he wouldn't be able to ignore it for long. Outside, rain began to fall, soft against the glass of the tower. In 2 nights, their worlds would collide. But for now, the janitor finished his rounds. The CEO watched the storm, and both carried the same invisible weight, waiting for something to break. The boardroom at Silverline Technologies exploded into motion the instant water hit the laptop. The sound was small at first, a sharp hiss of electricity meeting moisture, but it cut through the room like a blade. Sparks flashed across the keyboard, reflections of blue light dancing over polished marble floors and mirrored walls. Natalie Pierce jumped back, her chair scraping against the glass table. Gordon Hale shouted for someone to pull the plug, and a tangle of cables slid off the edge as an assistant scrambled to obey. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but noise and panic. Then the screen came back to life. Lines of text began to roll across the display, white on black, fast and unreadable. A window opened, showing folders, file names, and a slow-moving progress bar. It hovered at 91%, then 93, then 98. At the top of the window was an external address, an unfamiliar domain ending in Apex Data, net. No one spoke. The air smelled of ozone and wet plastic. Somewhere above the ceiling, the hum of the server fans grew louder. Natalie leaned forward, her pulse pounding in her ears, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Clara, her assistant, was the first to speak. her voice tight with fear. She said it must be sabotage. Gordon turned sharply toward the door, his finger stabbing through the air. The janitor. Everyone's gaze followed. Eli Turner stood framed in the doorway, his mop handle still wet, water pooling around his boots. The overhead light caught the drops on his sleeve, tiny reflections of the chaos behind him. He didn't move, didn't defend himself. He just looked at Natalie with a steady calm that unnerved her. Gordon shouted that he had to be responsible. Clara backed him up, saying no one else was near enough to cause it. Natalie's anger rose like heat from the floor. Humiliation burned her chest. The board had doubted her leadership before, and now her billion-dollar deal was unraveling in front of them. She demanded to know what he had done. Eli's voice was quiet, almost lost under the noise of alarms. He said he had to stop it. Natalie froze. Stop what? He nodded toward the screen. The data was being stolen. His tone carried no panic, only certainty. Security burst through the doors at Gordon's order. The sound of their boots echoed against the wet tile. Eli didn't resist as they approached. He set his mop aside, raised his hands, and said calmly that he had acted before it was too late. The words didn't help him. They made things worse. Gordon's face turned red, his voice cracking as he told security to take him out. Clara said to check his pockets, his bag, his tools. They found a small USB drive on his keyring and dropped it into an evidence bag. The faint click of the zipper closing felt final. As the guards led him away, Eli turned his head once more toward Natalie. There was no plea in his eyes, only quiet disappointment. Now you see why I had to do that, he said again, softer this time, almost to himself. The words stopped her cold. She wanted to shout back, to call him a liar, but something in his tone made her hesitate. When the door closed behind him, the room fell silent. The progress bar on the laptop had frozen at 99%. Then the screen flickered once and went black for good. A few drops of water fell from the edge of the table, each one marking the seconds that passed. Natalie's reflection stared back at her from the dark glass, pale and uncertain. She pressed her palm to her mother's silver ring and felt the faint engraving beneath her thumb. Trust the right people. She had spent her entire career believing she could read others, control them, manage them. Yet the man she had never even noticed might have just saved her company. The security alarms quieted, and only the hum of air vents remained. The deal was dead. The laptop was ruined. But as Natalie stood alone in the echo of what had happened, she couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe. Eli Turner had been telling the truth. The glass boardroom was a battlefield of silence. The executives had left, murmuring excuses, avoiding eye contact. Natalie Pierce stayed behind, staring at the dead laptop as if it might come back to life and explain itself. The reflection of the city lights shimmered on the wet table. Her pulse still hadn't settled. Somewhere in the back of her mind, Eli Turner's calm voice kept repeating itself. Now you see why I had to do that. It looped like static in her thoughts, infuriating and impossible to ignore. Down on the 47th floor, Eli sat alone in the small security room. His mop cart was gone, his tools confiscated. But he didn't look defeated. The overhead light flickered every few seconds, buzzing softly. He folded his hands on the table, waiting. He'd been in interrogation rooms before, though not like this. This one smelled like disinfectant and fear. He wasn't angry. Mostly, he was tired. He had done what he thought was right, and the outcome was in someone else's hands now. Natalie's reflection stared back at her from the dark screen. For the first time in years, she wasn't sure she trusted her own judgment. Gordon Hale had already made it clear he wanted the janitor fired and possibly arrested. Clara had supported that immediately, saying it was better to act fast before the press heard anything. But then, Miles Chen, her IT director, had called. His voice had the tone of someone who had found something he wished he hadn't. By 1:30 a.m., Natalie stood in the security operations center. The room was dim, walls lined with monitors showing network traffic, server load, and access logs. Miles pointed at a screen where timestamps scrolled by. He showed her that someone had accessed confidential files using an old contractor badge that had been deactivated months ago. The badge belonged to a vendor who had finished their work last spring. Yet, it had been used 3 times in the past week, all after midnight. He cross-referenced the logs. The same moments matched the strange upload on her laptop. Natalie felt her stomach drop. Miles said the connection traced back to Apex Systems. The deal she had almost signed tonight. The realization hit like a slap. She told security to bring Eli up immediately. In the small conference room, Eli sat quietly as she entered. Her tone was sharp, controlled, but her eyes were searching. She demanded to know how he knew something was wrong. He told her about the flickering routers, the unauthorized cables, the strange access patterns. He described how he had watched the same signal pulsing night after night until he recognized it wasn't normal data traffic. His voice was calm, factual, but there was weight beneath every word. Natalie realized he understood her systems better than most of her engineers. She asked him why he hadn't told anyone. He smiled faintly, a tired kind of smile. "Janitors don't give tech advice," he said. She looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly that he should have trusted her. He met her gaze and said she had been too busy looking up to see what was right beneath her. The words landed harder than any accusation. Her hand drifted unconsciously to the silver ring on her finger. Trust the right people. For the first time. She began to wonder if she ever had. Miles returned minutes later with new evidence. The contractor badge had been reactivated by someone with executive clearance. He hesitated before saying the name. Clara, Natalie's assistant. The one person who had access to nearly every system, every meeting, every password she used. Natalie's throat tightened. She ordered Clara brought in immediately. When confronted, Clara's expression barely changed. She said she had done what was necessary to secure the Apex deal. It was for the company's benefit. She insisted. Miles placed Eli's confiscated USB on the table, plugged it into a clean laptop, and opened a folder. The drive contained logs Eli had copied during his nightly rounds. The proof was undeniable. Clara had been siphoning data for weeks. Natalie's fury burned cold. She demanded to know how far it went. Clara's eyes flicked to the monitors. Then the alarm started. Miles's voice broke through the noise. A wiper program had been triggered, erasing drives across the network. Red warning lights bathed the room in color. Fans roared as the servers overheated. Smoke began to curl from the vents. Natalie shouted for the suppression system, but it didn't respond. Someone had overridden the safety threshold. The first crack of flame lit up the corridor outside. She turned to Eli, who was already on his feet. His expression was steady, focused. He grabbed his keyring, the one with the multi-tool, and said they had to move now. As they ran toward the server room, the sprinklers sputtered uselessly overhead. The air filled with the sharp tang of burning plastic and fear. Natalie's lungs ached from the heat. She could hear Eli's voice beside her, calm even as alarms screamed around them. "Trust the right people," he said. Then, the fire took the rest of the sound. The sound of the alarm swallowed everything. Red lights flashed across the walls, washing the glass corridors in pulsing color. Smoke billowed from the server room ahead, thick and acrid, curling like dark ribbons under the ceiling vents. The air tasted of metal and heat. Natalie Pierce ran toward it, her heels slipping on wet tile as sprinklers finally kicked in, sending cold water cascading from above. Behind her, a security guard shouted that she had to stay back, that it wasn't safe. But she didn't listen. All she could think of were the backup drives. If they burned, everything was gone. Eli Turner caught up to her just as she reached the locked door. The access panel blinked red, the system unresponsive. The fire had tripped the electronic fail-safes, sealing the room to contain the heat. Natalie pounded the glass with her fist, coughing from the smoke. Eli grabbed her shoulder, pulling her back just enough to see her face through the haze. He said he knew another way in. She stared at him for a heartbeat, then nodded. He dropped to his knees beside the panel, pulling his keyring from his belt. It was a cluster of tools he'd carried for years. Most people thought they were for fixing light fixtures. He used the smallest one to pry off the security cover, exposing the manual override lever beneath. Water dripped from his sleeve as he jammed it into place and twisted hard. The lock gave with a mechanical click. The door released, groaning under the pressure, and a wall of heat rolled out like a wave. Flames licked along the server racks, bright against the darkness. Sparks showered from overhead cables, hissing when they hit puddles on the floor. The sprinkler foam mixed with smoke, creating a suffocating fog. Natalie covered her mouth with her blazer sleeve and pushed forward. Eli followed, his movements sure and practiced. He had spent years learning every inch of the building's infrastructure. Now that knowledge was saving them both. The main backup array was already destroyed, melted plastic dripping like candle wax. But in the corner, he spotted the smaller unit. The parity drive, a single rack with a red label that read, Survivor. He shouted that it was their only chance. Together they fought their way through the flames, pulling the drive loose from its bay. The metal was hot enough to burn through gloves. Natalie winced, but didn't let go. Eli grabbed a discarded cloth from his pocket, wrapping it around the casing, and they staggered back toward the door. As they emerged into the corridor, a sudden crack of glass shattered behind them. The sprinklers flooded the hall with mist. The world narrowed to the sound of their breathing, the weight of the drive between them, and the hiss of water meeting fire. Natalie leaned against the wall, soaked and shaking, staring at the drive like it was the last beating heart of her company. She told him he could have left, that he didn't owe her anything. He said he didn't do it for the company. He did it for the people who still believed it could be saved. Through the fog, a monitor still glowed faintly on the far wall. The screen flickered with a child's crayon drawing a water droplet splitting into streams of colored light. Maya's design. For a moment, Natalie forgot the chaos. She stared at it, realization softening her expression. Clean work. That's what Eli had called it. Work done for the right reasons. When they finally reached the elevator lobby, she turned to him. Smoke had left streaks across his face, but his eyes were steady. She said she needed him to help her rebuild everything. Clean this time. He gave a small nod. Not proud. Just certain. Behind them, the fire suppression system hissed to life, drowning the flames in a rush of white foam. The world went quiet again, except for the steady rhythm of water dripping from the ceiling like time resetting itself, one drop at a time. The night after the fire felt endless. Smoke still clung to the walls, and the scent of burnt plastic lingered through the upper floors of Silverline Technologies. Natalie Pierce and Eli Turner stood side by side in the command center, exhausted but unwilling to stop. The company's future now depended on one final act. The servers were quiet, but deep inside the network, Eli and the IT team worked to rebuild what had been lost. He moved between terminals with calm precision, typing commands faster than most could follow. This time, he wasn't cleaning floors. He was rebuilding a fortress. By 4:15 a.m., the trap was ready. Eli created a honeypot file labeled Aquila Integration Prototype, loaded with invisible tracking beacons that would alert them the moment anyone tried to copy it. He told Natalie they didn't need to chase the traitors. All they had to do was let greed lead them into the open. The moment came sooner than anyone expected. Clara, desperate to erase her involvement, accessed the decoy file from her remote credentials. The trackers activated instantly, tracing her connection straight to Apex Systems' private network. Within minutes, federal agents were alerted. When Clara walked into the office that morning, she found agents waiting for her. The confrontation was quiet, but devastating. Natalie stood behind the investigators as Eli projected the evidence on the conference wall. Logs, access records, transaction reports. Everything tied together with the precision of a puzzle finally solved. Clara's calm mask cracked as the reality set in. There was nowhere left to hide. As she was escorted away, her voice trembled, insisting it had been for the good of the company. No one answered her. Justice didn't need to shout. News of the arrest spread by mid-morning. Apex Systems executives faced immediate investigation, their offices raided, their stock suspended. For Silverline, the scandal became something else entirely. Not a story of failure, but one of survival. At the emergency press conference, Natalie addressed the media with steady resolve. She said they had survived because someone invisible refused to stay silent, because integrity mattered more than convenience. She looked at Eli as she spoke, and for the first time, the company saw him not as a janitor but as the man who had saved them all. Later, in her office, she handed him a small box. Inside was her mother's silver ring. She told him it was his now, because he had earned it more than she ever did. He said he couldn't take it. She smiled and said he already had. By proving her mother right, trust the right people. The next day, the board announced his appointment as head of cyber integrity. Maya's name appeared on a new scholarship fund for children of Silverline employees. As the sun rose over the skyline, the tower looked different. Not cleaner, but honest. Justice had been served, yet it was redemption that mattered most. They had burned through the lies and found something pure beneath the ashes: faith, integrity, and the courage to start again. A year later, the glass boardroom at Silverline Technologies no longer carried the scent of smoke or fear. Sunlight poured through the windows, glinting off the polished surface of the long table where everything had once gone wrong. The skyline shimmered beyond the glass, alive with morning light. The company had rebuilt itself not just in systems, but in spirit. What had nearly destroyed them had become the foundation for something new. Silverline was now known as a leader in ethical cybersecurity, its recovery story studied in universities and cited as proof that transparency could be powerful. The air in the boardroom was calm, voices low and confident. At the center of it all stood Maya Turner, now 9 years old, a spark of energy among executives and engineers. She stood behind a small table with a device she had built herself, a robot that detected tiny changes in water quality and transmitted signals through the droplets. She explained that water remembers everything it touches, and if you listen closely, it can tell the truth. Her words brought quiet smiles and a few tears. Natalie Pierce and Eli Turner watched from the back of the room, standing side by side. The robot's tiny light blinked in rhythm with the pulse of the city outside, a symbol of what they had fought to protect. Natalie caught Eli's eye, and neither needed to speak. They both knew this child had built more than a machine. She had captured the essence of clean work. Later that evening, the city lights glowed beneath a soft rain. On the rooftop terrace, Natalie and Eli stood under the drizzle, watching the water trace silver lines across the railing. The same sound that once meant disaster now felt like renewal. Natalie said quietly that the night he spilled water on her laptop had changed everything. Eli smiled faintly and said, Sometimes you have to break things to see what's worth fixing. Neither spoke after that. The rain filled the silence, washing away the noise of the world below. From above, the city looked like it was made of liquid light. Rain flowed through the streets and down to the rivers, connecting everything in motion to Natalie. It felt like truth itself, always moving, always finding its way through. Somewhere in that sound, she heard the story of how they had begun again, the company, the people, the trust, all of it renewed, one drop at a time.